Hi, I'm Cindy Winget, the author of The Apparition, and welcome to my channel. So in today's video, it's going to be a little bit different because I'm not going to be showing you any books. This is going to be purely a discussion video. So lately on YouTube, I've seen a lot of videos about book hauls being a bad thing and you shouldn't unhaul books that you haven't read and, overconsumption and not utilizing your library and blah, 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 which in some cases is very valid. But I just wanted to put my 2 cents in and just tell you my thoughts and feelings on the subject. So in my humble opinion, I do not buy books for aesthetics. I don't just want to buy pretty books to hold up and say, look, my book, which is easy to do as a booktuber. But to be fair, humans are conditioned to like pretty things, and despite what anybody says, we all judge books by their covers. So be so for real about that, because it's true. So buying a book because it has a pretty cover is not that terrible, and you want to show it because it's pretty, and I don't see anything wrong with that. But I don't generally buy it just because of the cover. That's what initially draws me to it. That's what makes me want to look at it more. But I do read the back or the synopsis and make sure it's something that I would actually be interested in reading. And speaking of before becoming a booktuber, back when I was just a watcher of booktube, I usually bought books pretty limitedly because, of money and space and all of that. But being on Instagram and watching booktube videos and having people show all of these books, it's not because I wanted to keep up with the Joneses, as they say. It's not because I wanted to flex for any other reason besides the fact that I was being shown all of these books that I had not been previously aware of. And they all just sound so good. It has nothing to do with having all the same books as everybody else and having FOMO and all that. It really, honestly, for me personally, is not that. It's just, wow, that book sounds so good. Oh, wow, there's another book that sounds so good. Oh, and that book sounds really good. And so it's just the fact that before BookTube and before Instagram, I wasn't as exposed to these books. I had to find them organically in a bookstore or just browsing on Amazon, or somebody in my real life happened to say something. So my exposure to good books was pretty limited. And not only that, but people in my life and stuff don't generally read the same genre as me. And so if I didn't just randomly discover it on my own, I would never know about it. But when I discovered that there's people online that talked about thriller books and horror books and all these things, it was like, and I was exposed to so many new books and authors that I'd never heard of before. And I guess there was a little bit of FOMO because I was somewhat new to the genre a few years ago. And so, I was just like, oh, I want them all, But it really had nothing to do with aesthetics or keeping up with anybody else. It was just simply the fact that I was aware of these books and they all just sounded amazing. So I'm sure some of you can relate to that. So I feel like this discussion is going to be all over the place. I'm probably going to be switching topics and stuff because I'm just talking. I'm not really doing it in any kind of order. But I just want to give my own reasons why I don't necessarily use my library or utilize my library as much as I should. I really do want to, because I think supporting libraries is an amazing, amazing thing. But for me personally, I do have a few issues with library books. And one of them is for aesthetics. I'm going to be so for real about that because I do Instagram, and trying to take pictures of library books with those plastic covers is so hard because there's always a glare and it's so hard to photograph them. And so it is kind of for aesthetic reasons sometimes because I can't necessarily take a good picture of it. But outside of that, it's also because in the past, it's like I'll have one little dot on a page or something and I'll end up having to pay for that book. And so I'm like, if I had to pay full price for this book anyways, I'd rather have a copy that doesn't have the plastic and doesn't have the stickers and the library markings and all of that. And so that kind of frustrates me because there has been a few times in the past where I've had to pay for books for, if it was like truly destroyed or had water damage or something, I completely understand. But sometimes it seemed like for pretty superfluous reasons why I had to buy this book. And so that kind of annoys me because I'm like, if I'm going to pay that price, I'd rather just get a new copy. So that's always the fear for me, especially having young kids. There's always that fear that something's going to happen to this book. It's going to get ripped. It's going to get food on it. It's going to, something's going to happen and I'm going to have to buy it anyways. And then not only that, but especially with new releases, sometimes you're waiting months to get to that new book. And sometimes I just don't want to wait that long, especially if it's like a most anticipated book. I want to read it now, not in 3 months, So there's that reason as well. And there's also so much pressure because you have to read it in a certain time. And yes, you can recheck it out, but if it's a popular book, there's always the possibility that somebody has a hold on that book and I won't finish the book and I'll have to turn it back in and I never got to finish it. Or, I just feel that pressure, that need that I have to read this book right now so I can return it. And I just don't always like that pressure. I want to be able to read books when I want to read them. But I do utilize my library for books that aren't most anticipated books, and they're ones that sound interesting, but I'm kind of like, I don't know if this is going to be my thing necessarily or a new favorite. And so maybe I don't want to spend the money buying a new book if it's a book that I only think I might like, so that's when I do utilize my library the most, is if there's a book that I don't necessarily want to pay for because I don't know if I'm actually going to like it. And then something that's a little bit weird about me, I haven't heard anybody else say this, so I think I'm just a weirdo. Tell me in the comments if you're like me, so I know that there's somebody out there that's just as strange as I am. But the other thing is with checking out library books or on NetGalley when you read ARCs, if it was just an okay book or you ended up DNFing it, then it's like, whew, glad that I didn't pay for that book, But on the other hand, if it's something that I super, super loved and I would love to have a copy for my personal library, I'm so weird because I have a hard time doing that because I used to reread all the time, so it was fine to buy my own copy. But lately, because I've been buying so many books and I have so many books on my TBR, I feel that pressure and that need to just read unread books and not return to old books. And so if there's a book that I'm like, oh, I really love this book and I'd like a copy of it, but I probably won't reread it, or if I do, it's going to be like 10 years from now, then I have a hard time justifying the money to buy it because I could use that same money to buy a new book that I haven't read. And so I really have a hard time buying books that I've already read, which I know sounds stupid. Most people are the opposite. They like to curate their own library according to their favorite books, which is what I thought I was going to be like, but apparently I'm not, because I'm always like, oh, but I could buy a new book that I haven't read, or I can buy this book that I've already read and it's just going to sit on my shelf, And so I really have a hard time, and I go back and forth because I really honestly do want to buy a copy and have it, but at the same time I'm like, oh, I have $15. Do I buy an old book that's just gonna sit on my shelf, or do I buy a new book that I get to read now and has so much potential, So then I'm kind of frustrated because if you buy a book new and it doesn't have to be new, you can buy it used. What I mean is, if I buy the book instead of getting it at the library and I end up really, really liking it, then I'm like, cool, I already own a copy, yay, and so I don't have to worry about it. And if I don't like it, I can always sell it. Not to say that you can always sell it. I mean, there's not always a demand for that book or whatever, but potentially you could sell it and then you could use that money to buy a new book, And so for me, it just sometimes makes more sense just to buy it, which I know sounds so stupid, but that's truly how I feel. And that's why I love Pango books so much, is because not only do you save money, but they're usually generally in pretty good shape still. And so they look like new books, but you didn't pay full price on them. Plus it's like eBay where you can actually see the book before you purchase it, but you don't have to deal with like bidding wars or whatever. So I really love Pango books for that reason. But, because on Amazon, you can't see the book. They might say it's in excellent condition, but then it comes and it's not. So that's frustrating. But of course, if it's like an indie author, you have no choice to buy it on Amazon. But because indie authors are print by demand, it's always going to be a new copy. It's always going to be a pretty unmarked, unripped copy. So there's that. And so that kind of helps with the waste, because I know a lot of people are like, oh, but these books are just being wasted if you don't like them, because then you're unhauling them. But if you're selling them to other people, then it's not wasted, because then somebody else gets to enjoy it. Or the same as donating it to a library or to a free little library, other people get to read them, so it's not really being wasted. So I don't know. And I feel like buying books, you're supporting your local bookstores, you're supporting the author, so I feel like it's not a waste in my opinion, but that's just me. I mean, there is something to say about overconsumption, and I am guilty of it. For sure guilty of it. I have at least just as many unread books as I do read books on my shelves. And to be honest, it would probably take me like 8 years to read all the books I already have if I didn't purchase another book it would still take me like 8 years to read all my books. Not even joking. So yes, do I need all these books? Absolutely not. But do I want them, and will I continue to buy them? Absolutely. Because honestly, it makes me happy. Just seeing them on my shelves, and they're so full of potential, it makes me happy. I love organizing them and looking at them and talking about them, and it just gives me that thrill. And looking at these books, you're just like, oh, there's so much potential. I want to read this one and that one. And to be honest, I think a lot of us wanted to get to the point, at least I know I did, where you had your own personal library that you could shop, because before it's like, oh, I'll buy a couple of books and I'll read those books and then I'll buy some more. But eventually I wanted to get to a point where I could buy all of these really cool, awesome books, and then I can go shopping at my own shelves. I can look at all the books and decide which ones I want to read that month. And, it brings me a lot of joy. And so for me personally, yes, it is probably overconsumption. But to be honest, people can do with their money what they want. And as long as you're not going to debt for it, as long as you have the storage in your house for it, I don't see a problem with that personally. I just think if that's what makes you happy, if that's what you want to spend your money on, then who cares? And I know some people get frustrated with booktubers that unhaul books that they haven't read yet. And to be honest, I have a really hard time unhauling books that I have not read. Because when I look at that book, I think, what if I give this away, but it was going to be like a new favorite? Or what if I was going to love this book, And because sometimes I have books that I think are just going to be okay and I absolutely love them. And then there's books that I think it's going to be a new favorite and I end up not really liking it that much. And so I really have a hard time unhauling books that I haven't read. But I know not everybody's like that, and that's fine. I don't judge people for unhauling books that they're never going to get to, because it's doing nobody any good to have this book just sitting on your shelves gathering dust. And in their minds, they're thinking, I should unhaul this so that somebody else can read it that might actually read it in the near future and might actually enjoy it. And honestly, people's tastes change. Maybe you're not into YA books anymore, or maybe you used to love fantasy books, but now you've ventured into other genres, and so you might have those certain books on your shelves that you're probably not going to enjoy anymore because your tastes have changed, you've gotten older, you've gotten interested in different things, and that's fine. People change, people grow, and if you don't think you're going to like it, there's no reason to keep it. And not only that, when it comes to physical books, there's only so much room on the shelves, and so you kind of have to get rid of books in order to buy new books. Because for me personally, I know some people, I've been saying the word personally a lot. Personally, I do this. Personally, I do that. Anyway, I apologize for that. It's probably annoying to hear the same word over and over again. But personally, I don't like having stacks of books everywhere. I know some people are fine with that. They have stacks of books on their floors and it doesn't bother them. But I don't want to trip over them. I don't want to, it just seems messy and chaotic, and I don't personally like that. There you go again. Anyways. So if it doesn't fit on my shelf, then I really just have that angst, like, oh, it needs to be on my shelf. And I start sticking them on top of books, which is okay, but I don't necessarily love that either, because again, it looks messy and I just don't like that. But, each their own. If that's, some people don't mind the chaos, or some people actually like it, and good for them, but I just happen to not be one of those people. And so I need to create space on my shelves, and unhauling is the only way to do that. So I don't see a problem with it. And some people, they have a whole entire room to dedicate to an in-home library, but some people, they just don't have the space for that, and they can maybe have a couple shelves in their living room or whatever. And so, everybody's different as far as what their storage is. And yes, ebooks is a solution to that, because you can store as many ebooks as you want. But for me, I tend to forget what's on my ebook library, and I definitely prefer physical books, and I'm always going to prioritize reading my physical books over my ebook, always. The only time I really read ebooks is if I'm in bed at night and I don't want to have the light on for my husband's sake, or if I'm like out in public somewhere and I have a few minutes to kill, then I can just pull up an ebook on my phone. But otherwise, I really would rather have a physical copy, and I'm always going to prioritize them. And like I say, I tend to forget what's even on my ebook reading list. So yes, it saves on storage, but it's just not my favorite way to consume books. And also, when it comes to unhauling books, if I've had a book on my shelf for like 15 years, I've had to be pushed by my husband. He's like, how long has this book been here? And if it's been like 10 or 15 years, he's like, you're never going to read this. I'm like, oh, but I might. One day I might. And he's like, no, you won't, because you're always buying new books, and it's been sitting there for that long. Obviously, you don't have that much interest in it. You should just get rid of it. So he's kind of pushed me to get rid of books, and that's been really hard for me. I'm not gonna lie, but I think it's good, to declutter. So I encourage you to unhaul. Unhaul is not a bad thing. It really isn't. And I think it gets a bad stigma from people, but if you're not going to read it, let somebody else. Although I do know of some booktubers that will unhaul books if they've had it on their shelves for like a year or two, and to them that's too long, and so they just have to get rid of it. And that's crazy to me because I do not read that fast. I can not get to all my books that quickly. And so for me, that's insane to unhaul it if I've had it for a year, because I know realistically I'm going to have books on my shelves for a long time because I need time to get to them. But my interest is still there. I still want to read it. There's still potential there. It's just I read slowly. And so I realize that I will get there eventually, but it might take 5 years. And so I'm not necessarily the type of person that would unhaul it if it's been on my shelves for only 1 or 2 years. I think that's a little bit insane. But, if it's, I don't know, I think I want to say 5+ years, but even then, I don't know, I'd maybe even push it out to 10+ years or maybe 8+ years, because like I said, there's a lot of books on my shelves that have been on there for years, but I do want to read them. I honestly do. I just have too many books on my TBR. That's my real issue, is I just have too many books. And I know some people accuse booktubers of buying physical books just so they can hold it up, in their videos and be like, but I don't think that's true, because it's not necessary. You can always just put it up on the screen. However, there is some truth to it, because honestly, it's a lot of editing work later to do it that way. And it really is so much simpler and time saving to just hold up a physical book. So as a booktuber, I do prefer to have the physical copy if possible. But I'm not going to buy it based solely on that, because I really can just put a digital copy of the cover on the screen. So I don't think that's true personally. I think people think that, but I bet most booktubers would say that no, I don't buy a book just to show it off, I don't think that's true. Again, no judgment, but for me personally, oh my gosh, I can't stop saying that. But for me, I do not buy special editions. I do not have multiple copies of books. That's one thing I don't do. If I have one copy of a book, that's all I need. If I have that book to read, that's fine. I don't need to have the 50th anniversary copy. I don't have to have the Fairy Loot copy. I don't have to have all these different things. But they are beautiful, I will admit. They're very, very stunning, gorgeous. However, I just can't justify paying $50 to $100 on one book, especially if it's a book I already own. I just think that is crazy. But again, I don't judge other people for doing that. If that's what makes you happy, if that's what you want to spend your money on, that's your money, that's your prerogative. So I don't judge other people for doing that. But for me, I do not do that because I feel like that's a waste of money, because I already own that book. I probably already read that book. I don't need another copy. The one exception I will make is certain books. If I bought a copy of it, but the only copy I could find had like a really ugly cover, then yeah, I might replace it with another one. But I don't keep both copies. I will get rid of the ugly one and keep the pretty one. But again, I'm not going to spend $50+ on it, but I'll just find, a reasonably priced book that happens to have a better cover than the one I have. And again, if you're not going into debt and that's what you want to spend your money on, good for you. I just don't feel the need to do that. I don't need special copies of it. And before I started my booktube channel, I actually loved watching book haul videos. I don't know why, but people nowadays seem to kind of hate on book haul videos because it's overconsumption and they're just flexing what they bought and blah, blah, blah. And yeah, maybe they are flexing what they bought, but you know what? That's why I'm watching it, because in my mind, I'm like, they get to spend all the money and I get to reap the benefit, because I didn't have to spend my money on it, but I get to see the books. I get to hear about the books. When people have book subscriptions, I get to watch them open it and show me the contents, and I didn't have to spend any of my hard-earned money. Some book subscription boxes like Book of the Month, I think are very reasonably priced. Same with Aardvark. But some of these ones that are like $50, $60 and you have all the little things with it, for me, I feel like that's a ripoff, because you're not always going to like the book, you're not always going to like the items, and that's a lot of money to spend. And if I'm going to spend $60, I'd rather spend the $60 on just books, and books that I actually want to own, instead of taking a chance. But I love when booktubers do it because I get to watch it. They're the ones fitting the bill, and I get to see it, and I get to be like, cool, that's so awesome, or whatever, without having to spend my hard-earned cash. And so I don't hate on booktubers that do that. I actually am glad that they're willing to spend that money on content, because I get to reap the benefits without the risk, and if it's a book box that I was like, wow, that is really amazing, I can always go buy that specific box or whatever. So I don't hate on booktubers that do that, because that's why they're a booktuber. They're there to show you books. They're there to show you different things that are out there. That's the full reason why they're a booktuber. So I'm not like, oh, why'd you buy so many books? I'm always like, yay, they bought a lot of books, I don't have to buy 80 books. I can just watch yours and, see the books. So I think it's a little bit insane to hate on booktubers that buy a lot of books, because they're booktubers, like they need content, and it's not because they just want to build content. It's because they want to read these books. They're obsessed with books, just like I am. And, there's worse hobbies out there to have than buying books. Trust me. So I don't think there's anything wrong with book haul videos, and I don't know why they get a lot of hate recently. I think it's a little insane, because they're fun. But at the same time, I think there is some truth to the aesthetics thing, especially for Instagram. And people need to stop hating on people that buy used books. There's nothing wrong with buying used books. These books deserve to have love and attention too, even though they're not pretty anymore, because they might have a crease, or they might have, the binding might have creases, or there might be a corner that's ripped off, or whatever, But these books deserve to have love, and it saves you money. So I try to buy used books as much as possible, because the more money I can save, the more books I can buy. So there's really nothing wrong with that. But like I said, with Pango books, a lot of times you can get cheaper books and they're still in pretty good condition. But, if people want to buy books at a used bookstore and they have creases or stains or whatever, we don't need to hate on these people. It's ridiculous. It's a book. It's not that complicated. Yes, we are human and we are conditioned to like pretty things. That's just the way it is. But it's fine to buy used books. Personally, I have started buying newer books more often, but just because as I've gotten more money, not from BookTube, I don't make any money but from BookTube, but just like in general, then I don't begrudge myself buying new books, but I don't judge people that don't. So that's one thing I will say is, don't hate on people that don't buy new books. It doesn't matter. It's the same book, it's the same story, it's the same words. It does not matter if it's new or used. It does not matter if it's hardback or paperback. So for that, I think some people in the book community could be a little bit snobbish, and they need to knock it off. So yeah, I definitely don't begrudge myself buying new books if it's a very highly anticipated book, or if it's from a favorite author. That's fine. The thing is, I don't know. I do buy a lot of books, but I don't buy a lot of books. The problem is I just don't read fast enough to get to them. And so these booktubers that can read, 20 books in a month, it's not that big of a deal. They can go buy some books and they'll read them. But for me, let's say I buy 5 books, but I can only get to 2 of them. But then the next month I buy another 2 books, but I only read 1 of them. And then the next month I buy 10 books, but I only read 3 of them, And so it starts to pile up. And so that's really the issue with my having too many books. But you know what would fix that problem? If people would just stop publishing new books every Tuesday, that would really help. But they just keep publishing more and more books every day. And they all sound so good, and I have to buy them. So really, it's the publisher's fault, or it's the author's. I know I'm being crazy right now, but it's a true problem. If they would just let me catch up once in a while and not get books out so often, but they don't, and so I won't. I'll just continue to pile up books that I'll probably never get to, but I will happily do so. So I think that's pretty much all I have to say on the subject is, if it makes you happy to buy books, if you want to unhaul it because you're never going to get to it, it's not that big of a deal. It's really not. It's your money. If you have the space and you're not going into debt for it, go ahead. Do what makes you happy. So that's my takeaway for this video. So let me know in the comments down below what your thoughts are on this topic, because it feels like I've seen a lot of videos that are negative about buying books and being all for flexing and aesthetics and stuff. And I think we need to come back to reality and realize that we are book people. We're obsessed with buying books. That's just the way it is. This is our hobby. This is what we like to do. And I know some people think that a lot of people buy books just to buy books and have them on their shelves and different things. And yes, you can make an argument for that for them it's just aesthetics or it's just to, show off their pretty shelves or whatever. But by and large, I would say 95% of booktubers and book people in general, that's not the reason why they're buying books. They're buying books because they want to read them. And sometimes we just can't get to them as fastly as we would want to. So anyways, if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up to let me know. Please subscribe to my channel if you feel so inclined. I post every Friday and I hope to see you in the next one.